Hey guys, it's Dasha. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is going to be a review of the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is an adult high fantasy trilogy following Fitz. Fitz is the bastard son of the king in waiting, and when he is sent back to his royal family to be guarded for the rest of his life, the king in waiting abdicates the throne, leaving everyone else to deal with Fitz, and they eventually decide to make him the royal assassin. However, this is not an assassin story. This is not a training montage and epic battles. This is one of the most unique things I have ever read in my entire life, and I think everyone should read it. I absolutely fell in love with this series over the course of the 3 books. I will go through very briefly my overall thoughts on all 3 books separately, and then I will do the series as a whole. I am a big fan of this series, so obviously there's going to be a little bit of gushing, but obviously I will give my honest opinion because there are some things I didn't absolutely love about certain aspects of the books, certain books in general specifically. So I will definitely let you guys know all the opinions on that, but yes, I do love this series, so be warned. I do feel very strongly about it. So this first book, Assassin's Apprentice, I ended up giving 4.5 stars. I did not feel connected to it when I read it, but I overall really enjoyed it. I thought it was just different, and that stood out to me right away. It is called Assassin's Apprentice, and you are getting scenes of Fitz learning how to be the royal assassin, but it is not as grandiose or exciting as you might think it is. This is definitely a quiet fantasy, and this first book showed that quite well. I thought that it was a perfect length, especially compared to the other 2 that got really long. I enjoyed how everything in here made sense. It felt pretty cohesive, and overall I really just enjoyed the plot and how it tied up. I thought this had the tightest plot of the 3 actually, and I thought that it was a really good introduction to the world and the characters. You are following Fitz when he's 6 to like 16 years old, so it's a bit of a weird age to be reading through his eyes, and I thought it was a little bit jarring at first, which is why I didn't connect to it quite as much as I connected to the other books. But overall, this was a really strong entry and it made me excited to read the rest of the books, which is why I got 4.5 stars from you. This second book really expanded on the political plot, and there was a lot less action than the other 2 books, I would say. It did not have middle book syndrome. However, it really felt like it still made a lot of sense, but it was really much more focused on the character relationships. And it was definitely less plot heavy than the other 2. That didn't mean I didn't like it. It was the book that really made me fall in love with Robin Hobb and the characters and the writing, but it was just not as exciting as the other 2, and the other 2 aren't really that exciting to begin with. You are also introduced to Night Eyes in this, and Night Eyes is Fitz's animal companion. I won't go too into detail about him because it might be spoilery for some people, but if you like animal companions in your books, this takes it to another level, and it's just incredible how well it is done. This book got a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I really liked it, but I can acknowledge once again that it was so character relationship focused that there was kind of no plot. Towards the end, there are some kind of exciting things, and everything that the book has been leading up towards does kind of happen, but it just isn't quite exciting all the way through or intriguing. So I can acknowledge that this might feel slumpy to some people, but to me, I quite enjoyed it. This final book I just finished a few days ago in the month of January, at least at the time that I'm filming, and holy shit, this was such a ride. You guys can see this book is tabbed to hell because some of the best moments in the entire series and some of the most beautiful moments I've ever read in my life period were in this book. However, if I was going off quality alone, this book would be like a 4-star. It was way too long, it was a little bit repetitive, and I found that some of the logic in this was questionable. However, I didn't give a shit. This book was 5 stars to me in my heart because of the character moments and the relationships, and some of the scenes in this just like gripped my heart and did not let go. But then it's hard because like I want to be honest and say like, yeah, objectively, if there is such a thing when reviewing books, like this wasn't the best one of the series. I found that it was a little bit meandering and the intrigue was lost, and some of the character decisions didn't always make sense in my opinion, but like god damn the emotional impact of this book. So I ended up giving it a 5 stars still, at least in my heart. It's probably closer to 4. I think I gave it like 4.75 on Storygraph. I can't decide on a rating because my emotions are so strong, but I know that it's not that perfect. so who knows. Overall, as a series though, it definitely gets a like 4.5 to 5 star. Like it's a fantastic series as a whole. The things that you go through and feel for the characters and in this world, like you come to care so much for people that you don't really even know that well. I think everything is just really, really well done. So I'll go more into detail about that, but I thought I'd at least start by going through the books individually. So if talking about the entire series as a whole, I'll go in my usual review order of Compile, which is characters, atmosphere, writing, plot, intrigue, logic, and enjoyment. So starting with characters, which are kind of the focal point of the whole series. This is a very character-focused series. You are in Fitz's first perspective the entire time, and it is a very interesting perspective because Fitz is really, really lonely. He's struggling with regular like coming of age things like heartbreak and like making friends and all this other stuff and like figuring out his place in the world. But at the same time, you're also dealing with him having to deal with these things that like nobody should ever really have to deal with. Things like treason and backstabbing of like deathly proportions and all this political intrigue that no child should ever really have to deal with. But he's in this very precarious position as a royal bastard where he's royal enough to matter in political decisions and discussions, but not royal enough that he actually is taken seriously or given these massive responsibilities. So you're trying to navigate that through Fitz's eyes, and this poor man is just being dealt so many bad cards, and it's just heartbreaking. But he's such a compelling character regardless. He never, even when he wallows in self-pity, it feels justified and it feels like you pity him. It doesn't just feel gratuitous. It doesn't feel exhausting to read from. A lot of the times it's well deserved because the poor fucker suffers a lot in this series. He suffers a lot. There were times where I stopped, especially in like the second and third book, and I'm like, how are you still alive? I feel like you should not live from your injuries and from some of the things that you've had to contend with. But like, I'm glad you are because I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying reading your story. But beyond Fitz, a lot of the other characters are just so well fleshed out. Every side character is so important and feels so real that you come to care for them or despise them depending on who they are. And there are just these really interesting relationships created between Fitz and everyone around him because again, since he's the royal bastard, he doesn't truly have that much relation beyond the royal blood to everyone, but he's not really a part of the family technically. But the way he becomes people's family just by being who he is and his loyalty to the throne and to his tasks is so incredible to watch. And everyone in this book is just so unique. And it's just, I don't know, there's something so freaking, like I've literally never read anything like this where I felt so deeply and all the characters seemed so real to the point where you were like you get so immersed in reading from them. And I'm not usually a character driven reader. That's the other thing I have to mention is like I'm not normally someone who cares that much for characters, but the way they were written in the series is just beyond anything I've ever read. And it just makes for such a unique reading experience. Everyone down to the animal companion that Fitz has, Night Eyes, he simultaneously feels like part of Fitz, but it doesn't take away from Fitz when he's not with Night Eyes. Everything's just so seamless. The relationships feel so real. Everything develops in its own proper time. Nothing is rushed or nonsensical. Everything down to the romances between people. Everything is just so perfectly developed and it feels so real that I've never read anything like it. There are so many memorable, fantastic characters in the series. Obviously, the Fool is one of everyone's favorites. There are 2 more series that follow Fitz and the Fool after this first initial trilogy because the Fool is just such an iconic character and he's so unique. I've never read anyone like him, so that's someone I'm definitely looking forward to following. But also Burrick, such like I didn't think I would like him because he's not that nice, but he has a heart of gold. He is loyal to the end. He is so fatherly towards Fitz. You also have Verity, who you just really want to root for. He's almost like a side character. Like you almost have more perspective of him in Fitz's mind than you actually have interactions with Verity, but at the same time you get to know him really well that way, or you at least get to see him through Fitz's eyes, and Fitz views him very highly. So it's really interesting to see how your perception of Verity changes because of Fitz. And then Ketrican is a fascinating character. I hope we get more of her in future trilogies because I feel like she has so much more to give in this world. Same with Lady Patience. Like there's just all these incredible characters that are so rich on their own. You could have entire books filled with their backstory and their life achievements and their personality because they're so tangible. There's not much to say about the atmosphere. Like, it's good, but it's not the focal point of this. Fitz does bounce around between several areas throughout the series, and they all feel pretty fleshed out, but they're definitely like, they take a back seat to what is happening between the characters, but I would still say they're good. It's definitely more your typical medieval fantasy setting. A lot of it happens at Buckkeep, which is a large, like, it's a keep. It's a stone medieval keep where there's a bunch of soldiers and people working and stone walls and all that basic stuff. But you do feel like you're there, and that's because of my next point, Robin Hobb's writing. Her writing just makes you feel so many things, and her writing is very, very evocative to be able to develop those kind of relationships between characters and to make you feel like you are in those locations. It's just some of the best writing I've ever read, period. I've never come across anything like it. The way she describes feelings you've never experienced yourself, but you feel them. The way she describes things that you have experienced, and for some reason it feels like she's reached into your mind and plucked those thoughts out. The way she writes these situations and imagines them, and they feel so wholly real. You feel like you've lived them through the characters. It's absolutely astounding. Truly some of the best writing I've ever come across. I will be reading every single one of her series simply because the writing of this is so good. I don't even care what her other series are about. Like, the next one is set on like ships and has to do with pirates in the sea, which is never my thing, but I'm still gonna read it and I'm probably gonna love it because her writing is that good. Plot, intrigue, and logic are next, and this is where it got a little bit iffy for me. So like I mentioned when I talked about the books, this first one had a clear plot start to finish. It was concise, it made sense, you could follow the thread. But so many things are introduced in here and so many things are continued through here that it starts to get a little bit messy. This book actually had a bit of a lack of plot, to be quite honest with you. Like, there was a little bit of plot, and there was like a big event at the end to kind of close off the book, but it still didn't feel like it had a concrete plot. It felt like it was just setting up all these threads for this third book. And this one, again, it still had less plot than the first one. There was a goal in mind that Fitz was trying to get to, but it was so meandering because of the length that it got a little bit lost. It kind of goes into intrigue as well. Like, I just wasn't as captivated throughout these two when it came to plot as I was in this one. What kept me going through these was the characters, but it's not really plot heavy, plot driven. There's not a ton of intrigue beyond the political intrigue, and you have to be very mindful of keeping track of all that. Otherwise you're going to be pretty lost, because a lot of things that are even started in here end up in Assassin's Quest, the third book. So you have to be kind of mindful of that, and it's not always the most obvious because there's so much going on. So when it comes to the plot and the intrigue, these are maybe not the strongest because all the strength in these books lies in the characters and the relationships and the writing. Logic, I usually refer to several things. In fantasy, it often refers to the magic and the world building. The world building in this series made absolute sense to me. The magic is definitely different, so I thought I would quickly talk about that because it is not typical fantasy magic. It's basically mind magic, and there are two kinds. There is the wit, which is the kind of older magic. It is the bonding of animals. It is the speaking to animals through your mind. It's known to be kind of dirty. People are associated with being kind of beastly if they're able to practice this kind of magic, so it's looked down upon. There's also the skill. The skill is the traditional magic of the Farseer family, to which Fitz belongs because he is the royal bastard, and the Farseers are the royal family. And the skill is communicating with other humans through the mind. It's a lot stronger than that. There's a lot more to it, as you come to discover throughout the series. It can also be used to gently influence people into doing certain things. You can also fight through the skill if you are powerful enough, and you can literally destroy your opponent's mind and body through your own mind. But it is basically a kind of mind magic, both of them. In the third book, you come to discover that that is not the only magic in this world. It's just that a lot of the magic has gone out of the world and has become a little bit obsolete, but you definitely see more of it in this book, and I'm really, really glad, to be honest, that we got it at some point, because it felt like as much as we learned in the first two books about the wit and the skill, it still felt very limited to me. And while not all of it made sense in this third book, because a lot of it is this like ancient magic that is just, it's as old as the world itself, and many people alive don't even understand it because it's so old, it was still nice to see it applied in different ways and to open up the world and see a bit more magic in the world, especially obviously the last little bit. If you've read the book, you know. The last little bit where everything comes together and all the magic actually kind of comes out is so spectacular to witness, because it's still quiet like the rest of the book. It's not like a massive explosion or massive battle and massive this and that. It's still very quiet but just very impactful, and it was just so fantastic to watch. I'm really glad we ended up getting more of the magic. I think it blows the world wide open for the rest of the series, which I'm also really excited for. I enjoyed that there was a little bit more inclusion of magic at the end. The last point is obviously enjoyment, and as you guys can tell, I am a huge fan of the series. I think it is just truly fantastic. I have a very hard time talking about it objectively. Like, even talking previously about how the plot and the intrigue were kind of lacking is hard, because I don't want people to be discouraged, especially if they're like plot driven readers. Like, this is just such a good series all around, even if the plot sometimes gets a little finicky, that like I think you should still give it a chance if you're a plot driven reader. This is absolutely what I would now call, I think, my favorite series of all time. It's just so special. I have such fond memories of it, like thinking about, especially like this book with all the tabs, and just like popping one open and going to that page is just like my fucking heart. It's so fucking special. If you're looking for what kind of themes and tropes are included in the series, for tropes, I would say there is the mentor/mentee relationship. Definitely more in the first book, a little bit in the second book. It's not as present in the third. And you also have the mentor who is that kind of batshit professor, you know, that trope. Like, you kind of see it sometimes in the Poppy War, for example. Also kind of in the Final Empire, like the mentor is this crazy person who like has these unconventional teaching methods and is kind of wonky, but they're still the best at their craft, so they're the ones teaching the mentee. So there's that trope. There's obviously also the animal companion trope that is really present, especially in these two books, the most in this one, but definitely appears in this book. If you like royal and court politics and all these like political intrigue, that is a huge point in this. That is basically most of the plot throughout these books. And also Burke is the grumpy mentor who would absolutely die for his kid. Different mentor than the mentor-mentee relationship. What I was talking about in this one is the assassin teacher versus assassin apprentice relationship. But Burke is the stable master, and he kind of takes on the role as a father figure to Fitz, and that relationship is just spectacular. Like, Burke is grumpy and he's kind of mean, but he would do anything for Fitz, and it's just so spectacular to watch. I would say the themes in this series are definitely darker, and they're quite clear. I feel like a lot of people talk about the themes in this, definitely things like loneliness and depression. That is a huge thing. Fitz feels very lonely at the keep because he doesn't quite fit in, because he's the royal bastard. And he talks a lot, especially in the first book, and I think mostly in this one. I don't think he talks about as much in Royal Assassin, but he talks a lot about how he feels and how lonely he feels and how lonely his life is. And that ties into the other major theme that I feel, which is like fate and destiny and what you are meant to do. And again, that ties into another big theme, which is your duty and like your honor versus what you want and need, and how that doesn't always match up. I feel like those are just such big themes overall, because Fitz is given this role as the royal assassin in this book, and it haunts him throughout the rest of the series. And his first conversations in the first book haunt him to the very bitter end, and he's constantly reminded of what he has to do, what he must do for his family, for his king, and for everyone around him. And he constantly grapples with fuck, what do I want to do? What do I need for myself? This isn't for me. And everyone around him is constantly telling him, it's not about you. Like, the stake of the entire kingdom of the world rests on your shoulders. And he's like, I don't want to. I wouldn't say it's necessarily chosen one even, because I know that kind of sounded like I made it sound like that a little bit. It's not chosen one as much as you have a crucial part to play in this. What happens when you don't want it? You just want to go and live with a girl that you love and have your happy little life and be far away from all this like court politics. That's something that Fitz really grapples with in here, and it's just fascinating to read from, because it's not ham-fisted, it's not super obvious, it's woven in very deftly. by Robin Hobb into the narrative and into Fitz's monologue without it being overbearing or exhausting. I mean, it is kind of exhausting to read from Fitz's perspective because the poor man goes through a lot, like I said, but overall it's just very expertly woven in together, all the themes plus the plot plus the relationships, so that by the time you finish the first book you didn't even realize how intricate it was until you start the second book and you're just like, that was a lot packed into such a small book, and now it's just going to expand and expand even more. Anyways, I think I'm done talking about this series. I could go on for days about this because there's just so much packed into these books. Like, they're kind of dense and there's so much work being done even when you don't realize it, that by the time you get through them you just need to yell about them somewhere, which is kind of what I've done. But basically, if you are a fantasy fan, if you love character-driven books, if you love thematic books that are less heavy on plot and more heavy on relationships and themes and political intrigue, I think this would really, really work for you. I think that this is a series that should be in every fantasy reader's arsenal, to be quite honest, because it just sets the standard for character work and writing. I know it's like very high praise, but that's just how I feel. I'm absolutely going to continue and read all of Robin Hobb's work because I think she's just such a master at her craft, and I think this is a series that a lot of fantasy readers could like, and if you are intimidated by it, please don't be. It is worth your time. I think it is one of the best things I have ever read, definitely the best fantasy series I've ever read, and I'm just absolutely enamored with it. So maybe you should take this review with a grain of salt because I am a huge fangirl, but that was my review. 4.5 out of 5 stars for this series. It is immaculate. That was it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm getting back slowly into doing more reviews. That was definitely one of my goals for the year, was to not only write reviews for all the books that I read, but to also just film more video reviews, because I feel like that's such a core part of BookTube. So hopefully this wasn't too chaotic. Let me know if you've read this series, if you've loved it, or if you're thinking of picking it up on my recommendation. My social media is also linked down below. You guys can come talk to me there anytime. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!